Which famous conspiracy is the most interesting? Story 1: Phantom Time Theory, the broader claim that certain years in the early medieval period were either fabricated or duplicated by medieval chroniclers to serve political or religious purposes, is a real fringe historical hypothesis with a genuine academic proponent in Heribert Illig, who in 1991 argued that approximately 297 years between 644 and 9111 C were inserted into the calendar through deliberate falsification. Illig's version has been examined and rejected by professional historians on the basis of independent corroborating records from Byzantine, Islamic, and Chinese sources, none of which would have participated in a European medieval falsification scheme. The variant described here is more specific and more targeted, not a 300-year insertion, but the deletion of a single year, 607 AD, allegedly to realign a papal prophecy timeline that wasn't resolving correctly with observed history. This is a tighter and more dramatic version of the phantom time premise, the claim that a specific year was simply dropped from the record to make a specific theological prediction come out right. The conspiratorial logic is internally coherent if you're the institution that both makes prophetic claims and controls the historical record. Adjusting the record to validate the claim is theoretically possible. Medieval European chronology was controlled by ecclesiastical institutions. The tools for independent verification from non-European sources exist, but most people don't use them. What makes this version specifically interesting as a conspiracy is its precision. It's not claiming a vague multi-century gap, it's claiming one specific year, removed for one specific reason, which is exactly the kind of clean, testable claim that either resolves cleanly or doesn't. Most conspiracy theories prefer their claims unfalsifiable. This one has a date. Story 2: The Bielefeld Conspiracy began in 1994 as a joke post on a German internet mailing list. The premise: the city of Bielefeld, Germany, a genuinely real city of approximately 340,000 people in North Rhine-Westphalia, does not actually exist. Anyone claiming to be from Bielefeld is an actor. Anyone who claims to have visited Bielefeld is either lying or mistaken. The entity maintaining this fiction is identified in the original formulation only as them. The joke spread because it captured something specific about the texture of conspiracy thinking: the unfalsifiability of the core claim, the absorption of all counter-evidence as further evidence, and the sheer arbitrariness of the target. Bielefeld was chosen not because it's mysterious or significant, but precisely because it's unremarkable. A conspiracy about a genuinely famous or significant city would require explaining why it matters. A conspiracy about Bielefeld requires no explanation at all. The conspiracy achieved a specific cultural milestone in 2012 when the German chancellor at the time, Angela Merkel, made a public reference to it during a visit to Bielefeld, saying if it exists at all in a speech, a moment of official governmental acknowledgement of the satirical conspiracy that delighted the internet considerably. In 2019, the city of Bielefeld offered a prize of €1 million to anyone who could provide genuine proof that the city does not exist. No proof was submitted. The city confirmed it was very real and that it was excellent at viral marketing. The Bielefeld conspiracy is the only conspiracy theory in history that was primarily designed to demonstrate how conspiracy theories work, achieved lasting cultural impact anyway, and got an official government response. Story 3: The 1790s Illuminati panic in America is one of the most well-documented episodes of early American conspiracy hysteria and represents a moment when the fear of secret European societies infiltrating the new republic was genuinely widespread, expressed in sermons, pamphlets, and political speeches by credentialed public figures, including sitting members of Congress and prominent New England clergy. The original Illuminati, the Order of the Illuminati, founded by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria in 1776, was a real organization, a secret society of Enlightenment rationalists that existed for about a decade before being suppressed by the Bavarian government in 1785. It was genuinely secret, genuinely organized, and genuinely committed to Enlightenment ideals that the Catholic Church and the Bavarian state found threatening. It was also quite small and thoroughly dismantled before its supposed global influence began. The variant described here, that the Illuminati was specifically controlling early American mail routes to intercept correspondence, is a particular elaboration of the general panic that grounded abstract fear in a specific, vulnerable infrastructure. The post was the internet of the 1790s, the primary means of long-distance communication, physically handling letters from everyone, passing through a limited number of relay points staffed by people the sender had never vetted. The concern that someone was reading your mail before delivering it was not inherently irrational. The attribution of that someone to a disbanded Bavarian rationalist society was the irrational part. Jedediah Morse, a prominent New England minister, delivered a famous 1798 sermon claiming to have proof of Illuminati infiltration of American institutions. He never produced the proof. The panic faded within a few years. The Illuminati has been doing a lot of work in popular imagination for a group that stopped meeting in 1785. Story 4: Sandy Island, the island on Google Maps that didn't exist. And the theory it was military Sandy Island appeared on nautical charts and, until 2012, on Google Maps, as a substantial landmass in the Coral Sea between Australia and New Caledonia. It was approximately the size of Manhattan. It had been on maps since the 19th century, included in geographic databases, reproduced across multiple mapping products, and verified by no one who actually went to look. In November 2012, an Australian research vessel conducting geological surveys in the region crossed through the coordinates where Sandy Island should have been, and found only open ocean, approximately 1,400 meters of it, well within the depth range that survey equipment could easily characterize. The team reported their findings. Sandy Island was subsequently removed from Google Maps and other geographic databases. The island was not there, had never been there, had been on maps for over a century, because cartographers had copied from previous cartographers who had copied from someone, ultimately, who had either recorded an observation error, invented it, or misidentified a reef at high tide. The mundane explanation, a 19th century recording error propagated uncritically through cartographic tradition, is almost certainly correct. Mapping errors of this kind are documented and have been found on historical charts before, particularly in the Pacific, where survey coverage was sparse and conditions for observation were sometimes poor. The conspiracy theory version, that Sandy Island is a classified military installation whose non-existence is maintained in civilian geographic databases while its physical infrastructure continues to exist and operate, is appealing specifically because it converts a boring bureaucratic mistake into a deliberate concealment. The alternative reading of a place that doesn't exist on any map is a place whose existence is being suppressed. Both readings fit the same facts. Only one of them is boring. Story 5: The Tartarian Empire, the technologically advanced civilization that was mud-flooded into oblivion. The Tartaria conspiracy theory is one of the more elaborate and structurally creative fringe historical theories of recent years, and it has generated a dedicated online community that has assembled an impressive visual case from 19th century photographs, architectural surveys, and historical records, assembled in service of a premise that professional historians consider entirely without foundation, but that is genuinely interesting as a piece of conspiratorial world-building. The core claim: a vast, technologically advanced empire called Tartaria, or Great Tartary, which was a real geographic designation on historical maps for the Central Asian and Siberian regions under and around Mongol, Turco-Mongol political influence, was in fact a unified, globally dominant, Tesla-level technology civilization that was destroyed and erased from the historical record in the 19th century through a manufactured global catastrophe called the Mud Flood. The Mud Flood supposedly buried the ground floors of grand historical buildings, reset the demographic map of the world, and allowed the current order, sometimes identified as an Anglo-American imperial system, to rewrite history, eliminating Tartaria's existence entirely. The visual evidence the community produces is genuinely striking in isolation. Photographs of grand 19th century buildings with elaborate architectural detail that the theory attributes to Tartarian construction rather than the architects actually documented building them. Demographic statistics about population recovery after wars and plagues that the theory interprets as evidence of post-flood repopulation. The simply enormous size of 19th century buildings and World's Fair structures attributed to an advanced civilization rather than to the Industrial Revolution. What the theory captures and why it circulates is a genuine aesthetic response to 19th century architecture, a feeling that those buildings are too good, too grand, too elaborate for the history being told about them, and a desire for a more heroic story behind them. Story 6: The Man from Tord. The traveler with a passport from a country that doesn't exist, the Man from Tord story, is one of the most widely circulated interdimensional traveler legends in internet conspiracy culture, and its staying power comes from the specific, apparently verifiable details in its telling. A specific airport, a specific document, a specific outcome, and the implication of a genuinely inexplicable event rather than a vague anecdote. The man, as the story goes, arrived at what is now Narita Airport with a valid, well-worn passport from a country called Taured, located, he insisted, between France and Spain, where the Principality of Andorra actually sits. He had stamps from previous visits to Japan and other countries in his passport. He was utterly confused by the suggestion that his country didn't exist. He was held by immigration authorities, placed in a hotel room under guard while his documents were verified, and in the morning the room was found empty, the passport and all related documents gone, with no explanation for how he left a guarded room. The story is compelling and has all the structural markers of a genuine urban legend. It's specific enough to feel real, vague enough on verifiable specifics to resist confirmation or denial, and resolves into exactly the kind of impossibility that satisfies the interdimensional explanation more cleanly than any mundane one. The documented origin of the story is a 1981 book called The Directory of Possibilities, where it appears without source documentation. No contemporaneous records of the incident from 1954 Japanese immigration authorities have been produced. The story has the profile of an invented legend given specific details to increase credibility, which is exactly how effective urban legends are constructed, regardless of whether they're true. Story 7: Paul is Dead. The Beatles' conspiracy with government genetic engineering the original Paul is Dead theory requires only brief summary. It holds that Paul McCartney died in a car accident in November 1966, was replaced by a look-alike and sound-alike named William Campbell, and that the surviving Beatles embedded clues about this substitution throughout their subsequent albums. Backwards messages, symbolic cover imagery, lyrical references, in an elaborate sustained confession that they couldn't make directly. The theory emerged in 1969 from a University of Michigan student newspaper, spread through radio coverage of the backwards message claims, and generated enough genuine public interest that Capitol Records at one point reportedly received thousands of calls. Paul McCartney gave a press interview to dispel the rumors, which theorists immediately cited as further evidence of the cover-up. The MI5 clone variant is the specific elaboration that elevates this from replacement look-alike to something considerably more ambitious. Under this version, British intelligence, recognizing the Beatles' cultural and soft power value to British global influence, arranged not merely for a single replacement, but for an ongoing program of engineering identical clones to perpetuate the band indefinitely, maintaining the fiction of continuity across what would amount to decades of Paul McCartney. The MI5 involvement hypothesis is the part that requires the theory to be set in a world where human cloning technology existed secretly in 1966, was deployed by British intelligence for purposes of pop music continuity, and has been successfully maintained across more than 50 years without any of the participants, successors, or program staff having spoken about it. The original replacement theory requires far less. The MI5 clone version is the one that requires you to rebuild the 20th century from scratch. Story 8: The Frozen Cover-Up. Did Disney make a whole movie just to bury Walt's cryogenic death? Walt Disney died of lung cancer on December 15, 1966. Within weeks, rumors began circulating that his body had been cryogenically frozen rather than cremated, making him one of the first people to undergo cryonic preservation, waiting in a liquid nitrogen vault for future resuscitation technology. This rumor has persisted for nearly 60 years despite one significant evidential problem. The first human cryonic preservation didn't occur until January 12, 1967, nearly a month after Disney's death, and Disney's death certificate confirms cremation. None of this has stopped the rumor, which exists in a specific cultural space where the intersection of Disney's death, his futuristic Epcot ambitions, and the science fiction adjacent concept of cryonic preservation makes for a story too good to die regardless of the factual record. The SEO cover-up theory is a specific 21st century elaboration. The claim that Disney's 2013 film Frozen was titled and released specifically to ensure that internet searches for Disney Frozen would return film content rather than results about Walt Disney's supposedly cryogenic body. The timing is noted. If you search Disney Frozen in 2013 and onward, you primarily find a popular animated film about ice magic. If Disney was trying to suppress the Frozen Walt story through search optimization, the film name would be a clever way to achieve it. This theory is genuinely charming as a piece of conspiratorial logic because it starts from a false premise and constructs a motivation for suppression of information that therefore doesn't need suppressing, through a strategy that is hilariously disproportionate to the goal. Disney's marketing budget, deployed to bury a rumor. The theory assumes Disney knows what you search for, which honestly, they probably do. Story 9: The Dark Side of the Rainbow. A studio mandate across decades, and two different companies the observation that Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon and The Wizard of Oz synchronize in interesting ways if you start the album at a specific moment in the film. Muting the film and using the album as its soundtrack is real, documented, and has been independently verified by enough people to be a genuine cultural phenomenon with its own name, Dark Side of the Rainbow, or sometimes Wizard of Floyd. The synchronizations people note include thematic ones, lyrical ones, and structural ones. Whether these synchronizations are genuine, statistically significant, or the product of human pattern seeking applied to two long pieces of audio-visual art is the honest question. Pink Floyd members have consistently denied any deliberate synchronization, which is what you'd expect both if they didn't do it and if they did. The studio conspiracy variant, that MGM and Pink Floyd's label secretly collaborated across 3 decades and 2 different corporate entities to create a hidden synchronized experience, is what requires the extraordinary claim. MGM produced The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Dark Side was recorded in 1973. The two companies would have had to coordinate something that neither would benefit commercially from and that required maintaining secrecy for 50 years. Involving multiple record label executives, film studio executives, and the 4 members of Pink Floyd. Roger Waters' response when asked, he laughed. Story 10: Michael Jackson alive as Dave Dave. The theory that takes a grief-adjacent turn. Dave Dave, born David Rothenberg, was a man whose father set him on fire when he was 6 years old, burning away most of his face. He survived, underwent extensive reconstructive surgeries over years, and in adulthood became a public figure of a specific kind, someone who had come through extraordinary disfigurement and maintained a public presence, occasionally appearing on television. He and Michael Jackson, whose charitable activities included work with burn survivors and burned children, became genuine friends over many years, a friendship documented in photographs and accounts from people who knew both of them. When Dave Dave appeared on Larry King Live in July 2009, roughly a month after Jackson's death, the conspiracy community noted specific things: vocal inflections, phrasing, and apparent discomfort with certain questions, and a purported physical resemblance beneath the reconstructive surgery that they interpreted as evidence that this was Michael Jackson in disguise. The alternative reading, that a man with extensive facial reconstruction, speaking with a voice modified by both injury and surgery, would naturally sound and move somewhat differently from baseline, and that a grieving man's friend would appear strained when discussing his friend's death on national television, was rejected. Dave died in 2011. The conspiracy community interpreted this as Michael Jackson ending the Dave persona and transitioning to a different disguise. Jackson's actual body underwent autopsy, the results of which were published and unremarkable, in the specific sense that the results of a dead person's autopsy are unremarkable. The theory persists because for the people who believe it, no amount of evidence from the conventional record is credible evidence, because the conventional record is what the conspiracy controls. Story 11, Stevie Wonder is not blind. The cheerful celebrity conspiracy, nobody can fully dismiss this one, circulates with a specific lightness that most conspiracy theories don't have. Partly because the claim is inherently absurd, and everyone knows it's inherently absurd, and some portion of the people who repeat it are doing so purely for the joke value, and partly because there's a sliver of something that keeps it alive beyond pure comedy. Stevie Wonder has been blind since shortly after his premature birth in 1950, when excess oxygen in the incubator he was placed in as a preemie damaged his retinas, a condition called retinopathy of prematurity that was, tragically, common in premature infants treated in that era before the connection between oxygen concentration and retinal damage was understood. His blindness is documented, well established medically, and has been a central public fact of his life and career for 7 decades. The videos that circulate as evidence fall into a few categories. There's the catching a falling microphone stand category, where he reaches out to stabilize something near him that he apparently shouldn't have known was there. There's the apparent tracking of something in the room category, where his head appears to turn toward motion. There's the specific occasion on which he seemed to react to something visual in a way that surprised observers. The explanations for all of these are real and documented in vision science. People who are blind from birth frequently develop enhanced sensitivity to sound, vibration, and air movement that allows them to detect nearby objects through echolocation or pressure changes. They track sounds with head movements in ways that look like visual tracking. Falling objects create sounds and air displacement. A lifetime of exceptional musical sensitivity to sound in a person who developed without vision produces capabilities that look uncanny from the outside. Stevie Wonder is blind. He's also been navigating the world brilliantly for 70 years. Story 12, Kubrick's moon landing codes, Room 237, The Apollo Sweater, and the director who knew too much, Stanley Kubrick, directed 2001, A Space Odyssey, in 1968. A film whose technical and visual ambition was so extraordinary for its time that some people concluded, and have continued to conclude, that the same capabilities used to create 2001 could have been used to fake the Apollo moon landing footage. The theory that Kubrick directed the fake moon landing in a studio, secretly, at NASA's request, has persisted since the 1970s. The Shining Code variant is the specific elaboration that Kubrick, racked with guilt about his role in the deception, embedded confession clues in his 1980 horror film, Room 237, noting that the moon is approximately 237,000 miles from Earth, though the actual average distance is 238,855 miles. Danny Torrance's Apollo 11 sweater, which shows a rocket launch and is worn at specific moments in the film, the carpet pattern in the Overlook Hotel, the specific model of typewriter, Jack's manuscript, the hedge maze as a metaphor for concealment. Every visual detail of the film, reinterpreted as coded confessional. What the theory requires is that Kubrick, having been trusted by the U.S. government to maintain secrecy about an operation of supreme national security importance, chose to confess through symbolism in a major studio film that was seen by millions of people, rather than simply telling anyone directly. It also requires that the confession be obscure enough that the same government didn't notice it, and precise enough that the specific room number corresponds to the moon's distance despite being off by approximately 1,855 miles. The documentary Room 237, released in 2012, explores multiple theories about Kubrick's hidden meanings in The Shining, and presents the Apollo confession theory among several others. It is a genuinely interesting film about what happens when very close reading of a text meets very strong prior belief. Story 13: New Coke was a scam. Coca-Cola deliberately created a disaster to switch to cheaper syrup in April 1985. Coca-Cola announced that after 99 years, it was changing its original formula to a new, sweeter recipe. The public response was swift and genuinely extraordinary. Consumer anger at the removal of the original formula was intense enough to generate tens of thousands of complaint calls to the Coca-Cola company, news coverage framing it as a cultural crisis, and protest groups forming specifically to demand the original formula's return. By July 1985, 79 days after New Coke's introduction, Coca-Cola Classic was back on shelves, and the return was treated as a triumph. The conspiracy theory notes what changed alongside the formula restoration. When Coca-Cola Classic returned, it was reformulated to use high fructose corn syrup rather than cane sugar as its sweetener. HFCs is significantly cheaper than cane sugar as an ingredient. The switch had been planned for cost reasons, but faced predictable consumer resistance. The New Coke fiasco, whether engineered or coincidental, provided cover for the reformulation. Consumers were so relieved to have their Coke back that the change in sweetener was barely noted. Coca-Cola has consistently denied that New Coke was a deliberate gambit, attributing it to genuine market research suggesting consumers preferred the sweeter formula combined with catastrophic underestimation of the emotional attachment people had to the original. The conspiracy version is structurally elegant. A company needed to make a cost-saving ingredient change it knew consumers would notice, so it made a more dramatic change first, making the lesser change seem like a victory. Whether intentional or retrospectively convenient, the outcome, HFC's Coke returning as classic while consumers celebrated getting their product back, fits the conspiracy logic almost perfectly. Story 14: Mattress Firm. The money laundering theory that made a completely normal business sound sinister. Mattress Firm is a large American mattress retail chain with approximately 2,400 locations across the United States. The observation that drives this conspiracy theory is real and genuinely puzzling to anyone who has noticed it. In many American suburban areas, Mattress Firm stores appear with unusual density, sometimes with multiple locations directly across the street from each other, in strip malls where mattress retail demand would not obviously support that level of proximity. The Reddit theory that evolved from this observation proposed money laundering, a business that primarily sells single, large-ticket cash purchases, where customer frequency is inherently low, where it's difficult to audit expected sales volumes against actual inventory, and where a steady stream of inexplicably funded operations could be explained by supposed legitimate retail. This is, the theory noted, exactly the profile of a business ideal for laundering money through inflated or fabricated sales. The conspiracy is charming as internet theories go, because it sounds completely plausible until you apply any scrutiny. Mattress Firm is a publicly traded company with financial reporting requirements, SEC oversight, and external auditing. Money laundering through a publicly traded retail company with full financial transparency is considerably more complicated than the theory implies. The company went through bankruptcy in 2018, which is not typically what happens to an operation generating clean money from criminal sources. The more mundane explanation for the store density, aggressive retail expansion strategy, combined with the specific economics of mattress retail, where high margins per sale support relatively high-cost retail presence, and where brand recognition through ubiquity is the marketing strategy. They're everywhere, because being everywhere is the plan. The theory that they're laundering money is considerably less interesting than the theory that ubiquity itself is the product. Story 15: Planned denim obsolescence. Are blue jeans secretly engineered to fall apart annually? Planned obsolescence, The deliberate engineering of products with shortened lifespans to drive repeat purchases is a real, documented corporate strategy across multiple product categories, most famously in consumer electronics, where the phenomenon is well studied and has been the subject of regulatory action in some jurisdictions. Light bulbs, printer ink cartridges, and various consumer electronics have produced documented cases where manufacturers engineered artificial limitations on product lifespan. The extension of this logic to denim clothing, specifically the claim that modern jeans manufacturers weave micro tears into fabric to ensure they degrade within a year of purchase, is where the documented phenomenon of planned obsolescence meets a claim that doesn't have the same evidentiary basis. Denim's contemporary faster degradation relative to vintage jeans is real and observable to anyone who has compared an old pair of Levi's to a contemporary equivalent. The causes most textile researchers point to are genuine changes in manufacturing practice. Modern denim is typically made from shorter staple cotton processed through industrial techniques that produce a weaker fiber than the long staple cotton and more intensive processing used in earlier periods. Chemical pre-washes and distressing treatments that produce fashionably aged-looking denim weaken the fabric further. Cost pressures have driven manufacturers toward cheaper cotton and faster processing throughout the supply chain. The micro-tear theory, that manufacturing specifically introduces deliberate damage during weaving, requires a more targeted engineering intention than the general cost reduction trends that explain modern denim's reduced durability. The conspiracy requires intent where cost reduction trends explain the outcome without it. Both produce fast degrading jeans. One requires a meeting in which someone decides to add secret damage. The other requires only the standard economics of competitive manufacturing. Story 16, the Diamond Cartel versus Lab Diamonds. Are synthetic stones being sabotaged? The diamond industry's history with synthetic diamonds has been eventful enough that the conspiracy theory doesn't require much embellishment to be compelling. De Beers, which controlled the majority of global diamond mining and distribution for most of the 20th century, spent decades actively working to discredit, distinguish, and legally separate synthetic diamonds from natural ones, funding industry standards, lobbying for mandatory disclosure requirements, and running marketing campaigns specifically designed to ensure consumers understood that lab-grown diamonds were not real diamonds. This is documented corporate behavior, not conspiracy theory. De Beers spent real money specifically to suppress the perceived value of lab-grown alternatives. The motivation was unambiguous. Lab-grown diamonds are chemically and physically identical to mined diamonds, and if consumers treated them as equivalent, the premium pricing that made diamond mining economically dominant would collapse. The more specific conspiracy claim that lab-grown diamonds are being deliberately flawed at the manufacturing level, with the synthetic diamond industry somehow compromised by traditional mining interests to produce inferior stones, is where the documented history of anti-synthetic lobbying meets a more specific and less well-evidenced claim. Lab-grown diamond quality has improved significantly over the past decade, and high-quality stones are now produced routinely by multiple manufacturers in multiple countries, which doesn't fit a picture of effective sabotage. What's genuinely confirmed, natural diamond prices have declined as lab-grown alternatives have captured market share. De Beers has entered the lab-grown market with its own synthetic brand, and the industry response to lab-grown diamonds looks less like sabotage and more like market adaptation. The conspiracy theory is more dramatic than the reality. The reality is damning enough on its own. Story 17, HAARP Beyond Weather, the Global Circadian Synchronization Theory HAARP, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, is a real ionospheric research facility in Alaska that has been the subject of more conspiracy theories per square foot of antenna array than perhaps any scientific facility in history. The documented reality: HAARP is a research program studying the ionosphere, the upper layer of Earth's atmosphere, using high-frequency radio waves that heat and perturb ionospheric plasma to study how that plasma behaves and how it affects radio communications. It was originally funded partly by the military because ionospheric conditions affect military communications and radar systems. The mainstream HAARP conspiracy theory attributes weather modification to the facility. The claim that its transmitters can heat specific atmospheric regions to steer weather systems, create earthquakes, or induce droughts. This is a significant extrapolation from the facility's demonstrated capability to effects many orders of magnitude, more energetic and geographically specific than its transmitters could produce. The circadian rhythm synchronization variant is a specific and more eerie elaboration that beyond weather, HAARP is testing ultra-low frequency wave generation, capable of entraining human circadian rhythms globally, resetting the body clock of entire populations to schedules desired by whoever controls the signal. Ultra-low frequency waves do penetrate the Earth's surface and can be detected globally. The Schumann resonances are natural ELF waves produced by lightning that human neuroscience researchers have noted correspond to certain brain wave frequencies, generating a small, genuine research literature. The jump from ELF waves exist and can be produced artificially to HAARP is synchronizing everyone's sleep schedules is large, but the HAARP facility's genuine opacity, classified portions of its research, restricted access, military involvement, creates exactly the information vacuum in which specific elaborations like this one feel more credible than they would in a fully transparent research environment. Story 18: The Greenbrier Bunker Soviet Infiltration. When a real conspiracy spawns a better one, the Greenbrier Bunker is real. A fully functional classified government facility built beneath the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia, maintained in secret from 1958 until a 1992 Washington Post investigation exposed it, designed to house all 535 members of Congress in the event of a nuclear attack. This is documented, confirmed, and since 1992, it has been publicly acknowledged and turned into a resort museum tour. The infiltration variant builds on the confirmed reality. The bunker was operated under civilian cover, with staff posing as a television equipment company, providing services to the resort. The maintenance personnel were government operatives maintaining a secret facility while living as ordinary resort workers. The facility was used by people who appeared to be civilians and were not. The conspiracy extension asks if the American side could maintain a decade-long cover of resort workers who were actually government facility managers. Why couldn't the Soviet side do the same in reverse? A Soviet intelligence operation placing long-term sleeper agents as actual resort staff in a hotel that hosted regular government officials and had a secret government facility beneath it would be exactly the kind of high-value target that Soviet intelligence prioritized. This is a conspiracy theory that starts from confirmed facts and asks a genuinely reasonable question. If the Greenbrier was hosting both civilian guests and secret congressional survival infrastructure, was Soviet intelligence paying attention? The confirmed answer is that we don't know. The KGB was extraordinarily active against exactly these kinds of targets throughout the Cold War. Whether the Greenbrier specifically was compromised is unknown rather than confirmed. Unknown is where conspiracy theories live most comfortably. Story 19: The Max Headroom Signal Intrusion was a government test, or the greatest unsolved prank. The Max Headroom Signal Intrusion of November 22, 1987, two illegal broadcast hijackings of Chicago television stations in a single evening, never solved, is covered in detail elsewhere in this collection. But the government test theory deserves its own treatment as a specific conspiracy reading of the event. The argument, pirate broadcast intrusion capable of overriding major market television stations, requires specialized, expensive, difficult-to-acquire transmission equipment. In 1987, this equipment was not something you bought at a consumer electronics store. It was the kind of equipment that required either significant financial resources or access to commercial or government broadcast infrastructure. The FCC, which has jurisdiction over broadcast interference, investigated the incident thoroughly and found nothing. A civilian operator with the necessary equipment should have been findable. The investigation found no trace. The conclusion some draw: the equipment was either government-owned, operated by people with institutional access to broadcast infrastructure, or both. The FCC test hypothesis holds that the intrusion was a deliberate test of civilian broadcast vulnerability, an operation to assess how long it would take for stations to override a hostile signal, what the public reaction would be to unexpected broadcast intrusion, and whether the legal regulatory infrastructure for responding to such events was adequate. The alternative reading is that two technically sophisticated, highly motivated people executed a prank that required months of planning and considerable technical investment, succeeded twice in one night, and then maintained silence for nearly 40 years through either discipline, death, or complete absence from any context where they'd be identified. Both explanations require something unusual. The government test explanation requires institutional motive. The prank explanation requires extraordinary sustained secrecy from at least two people over 4 decades. Story 20: The Missing Cosmonauts. Two Italian brothers who claimed to hear Soviet astronauts die in space Achille and Giovanni Battista Giudica Cordiglia were Italian amateur radio operators who, in the late 1950s and early 1960s, claimed to have intercepted a series of radio transmissions from Soviet space missions. Transmissions that, if genuine, documented multiple cosmonauts dying in space before Yuri Gagarin's officially acknowledged first manned spaceflight in April 1961. The recordings the brothers made and subsequently released publicly include a heartbeat that appears to slow and stop, apparently from a cosmonaut dying in orbit. A voice in what researchers identified as Russian, apparently a female cosmonaut, described increasing heat and then going silent, suggesting re-entry problems and death. A Morse code SOS signal from what appeared to be a spacecraft. The brothers claimed these recordings were made from their converted communications van in Turin. The Soviet space program was genuinely shrouded in secrecy during this period, and it is documented that the Soviet program did have fatalities. Valentin Bondarenko died in a training fire in March 1961, his death hidden for decades. The Nedelin catastrophe of 1960, a rocket explosion that killed dozens of engineers and scientists, was similarly suppressed. The Soviet program's record of hiding disasters is an established historical fact. Whether the Giudica Cordiglia recordings are genuine intercepts of dying cosmonauts or fabrications is disputed. Technical analysis by radio experts has produced mixed conclusions about whether the recording characteristics are consistent with actual space communications from that era. No Soviet documentation of the specific missions described has been found in post-Soviet archive openings. The recordings exist. What produced them remains genuinely unconfirmed. Story 21: The Vela Incident, a nuclear explosion with no confirmed owner. 46 years later, on September 22, 1979, an American Vela satellite detected a characteristic double flash over the South Atlantic. The optical signature that the satellite's bang meter sensors were specifically designed to identify as evidence of a nuclear weapons test. Every previous bang meter detection had been confirmed as a nuclear test. The 1979 event produced the same signature and was never officially attributed. A Carter administration scientific panel concluded in 1980 that the event was more likely a satellite malfunction or a false positive than a genuine nuclear detonation, a conclusion that has been contested by subsequent analysis. The specific satellite instrument had no prior history of false positives. Hydroacoustic data, atmospheric monitoring data, and the specific spatial information from the bang meter all support a genuine detonation to researchers who have reviewed the complete available evidence. The most widely credited specific attribution, which appears in intelligence analyses and has been reported by multiple journalists who have reviewed declassified documents, points toward a joint South Africa-Israel nuclear test. Both countries had active covert nuclear weapons programs in 1979. South Africa eventually disclosed its program and dismantled it, confirming it had produced 6 nuclear devices. Israel has never officially confirmed or denied its nuclear arsenal. The specific geographic location of the 1979 event is consistent with a test conducted over uninhabited ocean to avoid detection. The political calculus the Carter panel faced was real. Confirming a joint Israeli-South African nuclear test would have required confronting both countries, acknowledging Israeli nuclear capability, and sanctioning an apartheid South Africa in ways that had domestic political implications. The inconclusive conclusion may have been the correct technical finding, or it may have been the politically convenient one. 46 years later, the detonation has no confirmed owner. Story 22: Harold Holt and the Chinese submarine. Australia's missing Prime Minister Harold Holt was the Prime Minister of Australia who on December 17, 1967, went for a swim in the rough surf near Portsea, Victoria, and was never seen again. He was 59 years old, a competent if not exceptional swimmer by most accounts, and the surf conditions that day were notably dangerous. Large swells, rough water, conditions that experienced local swimmers had declined to enter. A massive air and sea search produced nothing. Nobody was ever recovered. Holt was officially declared presumed dead in 1967, and a coronial inquest in 2005 confirmed death by drowning. The Chinese submarine theory emerged within years of his disappearance and has been given periodic revival, most notably by a 2005 biography by journalist Anthony Gray that presented it seriously enough to generate substantial media coverage and the 2005 coronial inquest. The theory holds that Holt was a spy for Chinese intelligence, recruited during a period of contact with Chinese officials, and that on December 17, 1967, rather than drowning in the surf, he swam to a waiting Chinese submarine and was extracted. The theory has specific appeal because it provides an explanation for the absence of a body, a problem that haunts the drowning explanation, though bodies are routinely lost in ocean conditions like those present that day, and because the Cold War context of 1967 was rich with actual spy cases, actual defections, and actual covert intelligence operations by multiple powers. The Australian government's official position is death by drowning. No credible evidence supporting the submarine theory has been produced. The theory persists because a missing prime minister with no body is exactly the kind of gap that alternatives rush to fill. Story 23: The Franklin Credit Union Scandal. The cover-up that was darker than the crime. The Franklin Credit Union scandal is a genuinely documented financial fraud case that became the seed of an additional, far darker, and considerably less verified set of allegations, and the distinction between what is confirmed and what doesn't matter significantly here. What is documented and confirmed: Lawrence King ran the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska, which he embezzled from extensively over years, eventually stealing approximately $40 million and using the funds for personal enrichment and political connections. King was a rising star in Nebraska Republican Party circles, sang the national anthem at the 1984 Republican National Convention, and hosted lavish fundraising events. He was convicted of financial fraud in 1991 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. What is the conspiracy theory layer? In the course of various investigations into King and his associates, allegations emerged that went well beyond financial fraud into claims of a trafficking and abuse network involving prominent political figures in Nebraska and allegedly extending to Washington, D.C. A Nebraska State Legislative Committee investigated these allegations, producing a report that found some of them credible and others the result of manipulation and false testimony. The committee's own findings were themselves contested. The case became the subject of a book, television documentary, and sustained alternative media coverage. Some of the specific named accusers subsequently recanted. Some maintained their accounts, and several aspects of the broader allegations were never conclusively resolved in either direction. The financial crime is established. The additional allegations exist in the category of claimed but not judicially confirmed, complicated by a record of both genuine witness corroboration and documented false testimony in the same case. Story 24, the lead mask case. Two men dead on a hill with instructions that suggest they expected to die differently on August 20th, 1966. The body of Miguel Josviana, 34, was found on a hillside on Morro do Vintum in Niterói, Brazil, alongside the body of Manuel Pereira Ferreira, 32. Both men were electrical technicians. Both were well-dressed, suits and raincoats, in an area with no obvious reason for two electronic technicians in suits to be. Both were wearing crude, improvised lead-eye masks, the kind of eye mask you would construct from a lead sheet if you needed to filter specific radiation. A notebook found nearby contained cryptic instructions in Portuguese. The notebook's instructions, as reported by investigators, 1630 a star no local determinado, 1830 ingerir capsulas, apos efeito proteger metais agredar spinal mascara, 1630 be at the determined location, 1830 ingest capsules, after effect protecting metals await signal mask. The cause of death was never officially established. No toxic substances were found in the autopsies, though the testing available in 1966 was limited. No witnesses explained what happened on the hill. The context that makes this specific case genuinely strange. Brazil in the 1960s had a significant and well-documented culture of UFO contact groups, spiritist organizations who believed that contact with extraterrestrial intelligences was possible through specific meditative and chemical practices, and that preparation for such contact required specific protective measures. The lead masks fit a known category of protection discussed in these groups against radiation from UFOs or contact signals. Whether the two men died in a failed contact attempt, an accidental overdose of an undetected substance, or something else is genuinely unresolved. The official case was never closed. Story 25, the Montauk Project, where government mind control met time travel and inspired Stranger Things camp hero, is a real place. A decommissioned U.S. Air Force station at Montauk Point, on the eastern tip of Long Island, New York, built during World War II to protect New York Harbor, later maintained as a radar installation during the Cold War, decommissioned in 1981. And eventually turned into a state park. Its large AN/FPS-35 radar dish, a Cold War-era installation, still stands in the park, which has a genuinely atmospheric quality of abandoned military infrastructure in a scenic coastal location. The Montauk Project conspiracy theory holds that beneath Camp Hero, the military continued operating secret facilities after the official decommissioning, conducting experiments in psychological warfare, mind control, and eventually time travel. The primary sources for this narrative are Preston Nichols and Peter Moon, whose series of books beginning with the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, published in 1992, describe in extensive first-person detail recovered memories of participation in these experiments. The books are self-published, and the claimed events are not corroborated by any documentary or independent witness evidence. The Stranger Things connection is explicitly acknowledged by the show's creators, the Duffer Brothers, who have confirmed that the Montauk Project and its underground military base aesthetic was a direct inspiration for the fictional Hawkins National Laboratory and its interdimensional experiments in the show. The show's working title, during development, was Montauk. What makes the Montauk Project compelling as a conspiracy myth is that it sits in a specific tradition of underground military base narratives that gives a familiar structure to the unfamiliar Cold War-era secrecy, real decommissioned military infrastructure, the intuition that strange things happen in places the public is kept away from. The radar dish still stands. People go look at it. Nothing underneath it has been confirmed. Story 26, Denver International Airport's underground city, the most transparent conspiracy in aviation. Denver International Airport, which opened in 1995 after a famously delayed and over-budget construction project, made specific aesthetic choices that have proved consistently, durably conspiratorial in the public imagination. The main terminal contains enormous murals by artist Leo Tanguma that depict what can only be described as apocalyptic imagery. Children in coffins, cities burning, a gas-masked military figure with a sword, children of the world bringing offerings to a central figure. A large blue horse sculpture near the terminal entrance has glowing red eyes and killed its creator when a piece fell on him during construction. There are gargoyles. The airport authorities have been aware of the conspiracy theories for decades and have, with evident good humor, leaned into them. There is a gargoyle statue in the terminal that holds a conspiracy theory plaque making jokes about the underground aliens, and the airport's official marketing has at various points played with the "what's really down there" framing. What's confirmed below the airport: an extensive automated baggage handling system, a 47-level underground roadway system, extensive service tunnels, and the infrastructure typical of a very large airport built in the 1990s. The baggage system in particular was notorious for its troubled implementation and generated enormous amounts of construction documentation, which is available and extremely boring. The conspiracy's specific claims: multi-level underground bunkers built for global elites, connected tunnels forming a city-scale shelter system, New World Order symbology embedded throughout, are consistent with the airport's genuine aesthetic oddness, while requiring a significantly more dramatic interpretation of what standard airport infrastructure and contemporary mural art actually are. The airport is strange. The murals are genuinely unsettling. The underground city has service tunnels. Story 27 Dulce Base. The underground laboratory where humans and aliens had a firefight, the Dulce Base conspiracy, is one of the most elaborate and specific entries in the underground alien base subgenre, and it has a specific geographic anchor that gives it a particular texture: Archuleta Mesa, near the small town of Dulce in Rio Arriba County, New Mexico, a region that has documented associations with unusual aerial phenomena and that sits near Jicarilla Apache Nation land. The specific claims: beneath Archuleta Mesa, a joint U.S. alien underground laboratory complex exists across multiple levels, with the lower levels controlled by extraterrestrials conducting experiments on humans and other organisms. In 1979, allegedly, a firefight broke out between U.S. military personnel and the extraterrestrials, the Dulce Wars, resulting in casualties on both sides and a breakdown in the cooperative arrangement between the U.S. government and the alien species involved. The primary sources for this narrative are a former Dulce security officer named Thomas Costello, whose photographs and documentation have never been independently verified, and Paul Benowitz, an Albuquerque businessman who became convinced through his own monitoring activities that aliens were operating underground in New Mexico. Benowitz's story has a specific and documented additional dimension. Evidence from declassified documents suggests that Air Force Office of Special Investigations personnel deliberately fed Benowitz disinformation about underground alien bases to distract him from what he had actually detected. Classified military communications from Kirtland Air Force Base. Whether his subsequent elaborate belief in Dulce Base reflected genuine insight, deliberately induced delusion, or both remains genuinely debated among UFO researchers who have studied the case. The deliberate disinformation angle is the most disturbing element. The possibility that a conspiracy theory about aliens was created by government agents to cover classified human activities. Story 28, the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins, Great Horned Owls, or Interdimensional Visitors. On the night of August 21-22, 1955, members of the Sutton family at a farmhouse near Kelly, Kentucky, reported an encounter that began when one family member, Billy Ray Taylor, came back from the well reporting that he had seen a bright silver object land in a field nearby. What followed, over the next several hours, was a sustained and reportedly terrifying encounter with small, silvery creatures, described as approximately 3 feet tall, with large eyes, large ears, long arms ending in clawed hands, and moving in an unusual floating or gliding manner, that approached the farmhouse and were shot at repeatedly by multiple family members with rifles and shotguns. The Sutton family went to the Hopkinsville police station in the middle of the night to report what had happened. Multiple police officers and members of the press subsequently went to the farmhouse and reported that the family was genuinely terrified and that the property showed evidence of the frantic activity described. No physical evidence of the creatures was found. The skeptical explanation most seriously advanced by subsequent researchers, most comprehensively by researcher Joe Nickel, is great horned owls. The physical description of the Kelly entities, the floating movement, the large eyes and ears, the behavior of approaching and retreating, the claws, and the apparent resistance to shotgun fire at close range all map onto great horned owls with unusual consistency. The family's description of the creatures being hit and flying away without falling down is specifically consistent with bird anatomy and inconsistent with the alien body plan most people imagine. The family's terror was genuine. What caused it has been debated for 70 years. Story 29, the Lake Baikal underwater humanoids, Soviet military divers, and the silver-suited entities Lake Baikal in Siberia is the world's deepest lake, 1,642 meters at its maximum depth, the world's oldest lake at approximately 25 million years, and contains approximately 20% of the world's unfrozen fresh surface water. It is also the setting for a specific piece of Soviet-era military mystery that has circulated in Russian UFO and anomalous phenomena literature, and subsequently in international equivalents. The account, attributed to declassified Soviet military files by Russian UFO researcher Vladimir Azaza and others, describes a Soviet military underwater training operation at Lake Baikal, in which divers at a depth of approximately 50 meters encountered humanoid entities in silver suits without diving equipment, roughly 3 meters tall. When ordered to attempt to capture one of the entities, the entire group of divers was allegedly struck by a force that ejected them rapidly to the surface, resulting in decompression sickness that killed 3 and injured others. The documented original source for this account is Soviet-era UFO literature rather than official military records, and no Western researchers have independently accessed the specific classified documents claimed to support it. The account has characteristics common to military anomalous phenomena reports of the Cold War era, Soviet military setting, specific location with genuine mystique, official document framing, and a dramatic event with implausible but specific details. Lake Baikal has its own genuine anomalies worth noting. It contains documented reports of unusual underwater lights by researchers who have studied the lake scientifically, and its extreme depth and unusual biology produce phenomena that are genuinely strange by normal limnological standards. Whether the documented strangeness connects to the silver-suited humanoid account is a different question from whether the lake itself is unusual. The lake is genuinely unusual. Story 30, the Umbrella Conspiracy. Big Brawly and the deliberately fragile wind-defeating mechanism. This is the conspiracy theory that most honestly captures the universal human experience of standing in the rain, holding the inverted skeleton of what used to be an umbrella, cursing at the wind, and wondering if this could possibly be accidental. The logic is impeccable at the level of basic incentive structure. An umbrella manufacturer's ideal consumer is one who buys an umbrella frequently. An umbrella that lasted indefinitely would be purchased once and never again, which is a terrible business model. Therefore, umbrella manufacturers have every economic incentive to produce umbrellas that fail. The specific mode of failure, the internal wire frame inverting and snapping in moderate wind, is so consistent across umbrella brands and price points that the universality of the failure mode suggests coordinated design rather than coincidental inadequacy. There exists, in fact, a small market for indestructible umbrellas. Wind-resistant umbrella designs exist, using flexible fiberglass ribs rather than rigid metal ones, with inverted dome geometries that channel wind rather than catching it. These designs do work significantly better in high winds. They are more expensive than standard umbrellas. They are a small fraction of the overall umbrella market. The conspiracy theory collapses somewhat here. If indestructible umbrellas exist, and are available for purchase, the suppression conspiracy is at best partial. The more mundane explanation that most umbrella purchases are impulse buys at the moment of rain, where low price rather than durability drives the decision, and that the market segment that wants quality umbrellas is small enough to be served without threatening the disposable umbrella economy, explains the same facts without requiring an industry cartel meeting to keep the good umbrellas off the market. Still, the frame always snaps in the same place, every time. Story 31, the Nunavut Sunset Shift. When global warming made the sun appear in the wrong place, this entry sits in an unusual category. Something that looked like a conspiracy was reported as anomalous by credible local observers, generated genuine scientific attention, and turned out to have a real explanation, but an explanation that is itself genuinely alarming in what it implies. In 2010, residents of Ilulissat, Greenland, reported that the sun was rising approximately 2 days earlier than expected after the winter polar night, appearing in the sky on January 11, when historical records and astronomical calculations predicted it shouldn't appear until January 13. This was sufficiently anomalous and sufficiently consistent with residents' lived experience and traditional knowledge of the sun's annual return that it generated both media coverage and scientific inquiry. The scientific explanation that emerged, the premature appearance of the sun, was the result of atmospheric refraction, the bending of light as it passes through layers of atmosphere of different densities and temperatures. In normal conditions, atmospheric refraction bends light enough to make the sun appear slightly higher above the horizon than its actual geometric position. The extraordinary refraction producing the early Greenlandic sunrise was caused by the unusual temperature differential between extremely cold surface air and slightly warmer air above it. A differential itself caused by declining sea ice extent, changing the thermal properties of the lower atmosphere. In other words, the sun appeared in the wrong place because Arctic warming had changed the atmosphere enough to change how light behaves in it. The conspiracy theory about a polar shift is wrong. The explanation for why the sun appears in the wrong place is arguably more disturbing than a conspiracy would be, because it's something that's actually happening. Story 32, the Titanic was actually the Olympic. The insurance fraud switch that sank the wrong ship, the Olympic, was the Titanic's sister ship, launched first, and genuinely damaged in a collision with Hump's Hawk in September 1911 that caused significant damage to the Olympic's hull and starboard propeller. Damage whose repair costs and the subsequent loss of revenue from the Olympic's time out of service created substantial financial problems for the White Star Line. The conspiracy theory holds that White Star, facing financial difficulty, secretly swapped the names and identities of the two ships, passing off the Titanic as the Olympic for insurance purposes, then intentionally sinking the barely damaged, now uninsurable Olympic to collect the insurance on a ship the company couldn't profitably operate. The genuine passengers and crew were either unknowing participants in a fraud or, in the more disturbing versions, expendable. The theory was popularized by Robin Gardner's 1998 book Titanic, The Ship That Never Sank, which presented the ship swap hypothesis in detail. It has been examined by maritime historians and Titanic researchers who have identified multiple specific factual problems. The Olympic and Titanic had visible differences in their layouts that were documented and would have been noticed. The ship's hull numbers were stamped in multiple internal locations that wouldn't easily survive a name swap, and the insurance payout for the Titanic didn't cover the ship's full value. The confirmed reality that the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank with catastrophic loss of life through a series of decisions that have been extensively studied is well documented. The insurance fraud theory requires that all of that documentation is fraudulent, which requires a much larger conspiracy than the ship swap itself. Story 33, Lord Kitchener. The man whose disappearance bred a legend the same night he died, Field Marshal Herbert Kitchener, 1st Earl Kitchener, was the most famous British military figure of the early 20th century. The face of the iconic Your Country Needs You recruitment poster, the Secretary of State for War, and the man whose organizational capabilities had built the mass British army that was fighting on the Western Front. On June 5, 1916, Hampshire, carrying Kitchener to Russia for a diplomatic mission, struck a German mine off the Orkney Islands and sank with the loss of 737 lives. Kitchener was among those killed. His body was never recovered. The no-body problem generated conspiracy theories almost immediately, because Kitchener was significant enough that people found his death hard to accept, and his unrecovered body provided the opening for alternatives. The specific claims that emerged, that he was betrayed by a faction within the British establishment that feared his growing influence and popularity, that he survived the sinking and was secretly transported elsewhere, that he spent the remainder of his life running a shadow military operation in Russia. The spy betrayal variant has been given occasional support by writers who note that the Hampshire's route had been changed at the last minute, that the route selected was not adequately swept for mines, and that certain decisions around the mission's security appear in retrospect to have been inadequate. Whether these represented genuine negligence, wartime information leakage, or deliberate sabotage is something historians have debated without resolution. The survival variant rests almost entirely on the absence of a body, which in the context of a warship sinking in cold northern seas is exactly what you'd expect regardless of who was aboard. Story 34: Polybius, the government arcade game that caused amnesia and nightmares. Or didn't exist. Polybius is a legend about an arcade game, allegedly appearing in Portland, Oregon arcades in 1981, causing in players who spent time with it intense psychological effects, including amnesia, nightmares, seizures, and a compulsion to return and play despite the distressing effects. Men in black suits were allegedly seen collecting data from the machines. After approximately a month, the machines disappeared. No record of any company called Sinneslöschen has been found. No player who experienced the effects has ever been publicly identified, and no physical example of the machine has surfaced. The specific cultural product this legend represents is worth understanding. It is a story that could only exist after the golden age of arcade gaming, when the specific social experience of arcades, dark rooms, loud machines, groups of strangers, the slightly unsettling quality of intense engagement with a machine you didn't fully understand, was available as a setting. Polybius is the internet-era mythology of the arcade era, appearing in forums in the late 1990s and early 2000s, as people who had grown up in arcades nostalgized about their specific strangeness. No contemporaneous record of Polybius, no newspaper coverage of mass amnesia at Portland arcades, no hospital records of seizure clusters near specific locations, no coin-op industry records of the machine or manufacturer has been found from 1981. The legend appears to have originated entirely in online discussion, probably in 1999 or later. Whether any real incident or real machine, however minor, provided a seed for the legend is unknown. The story is polished, internally consistent, and entirely unverifiable. It has been referenced in The Simpsons, numerous video game podcasts, and a retrospective documentary. It may be entirely invented. It is one of the internet's most successful original myths. Story 35: Mirabel Airport, the white elephant conspiracy nobody talks about. Because the airport doesn't exist anymore, Montreal Mirabel International Airport opened in 1975 as the largest airport in the world by land area. 400 square kilometers of Quebec countryside expropriated from farming families. A facility designed for the future of aviation, including supersonic travel, with a passenger terminal of striking modernist design. By 1997, all scheduled passenger flights had moved to Montreal Trudeau Airport. The passenger terminal was demolished in 2014. The airport remains in operation for cargo and private aviation, a ghost of what it was designed to be. The conspiracy theory asks a genuinely interesting question about the gap between the scale of the investment and the scale of the failure. Did anyone in the Canadian government or the Quebec provincial government actually believe this airport would succeed? Or was it always primarily a political project? The expropriation of 97,000 acres of farmland from over 3,000 farm families, conducted compulsorily through the 1970s in ways that caused substantial community displacement and long-standing legal disputes, generated significant political opposition and legal actions that continued for decades. The claim that the airport was designed to fail, or more specifically, that no serious effort was made to ensure its success because its political value was in the construction and the disruption of specific rural political communities rather than in the functioning airport, is not well evidenced in any specific documentary sense. What is well documented is the catastrophic underperformance relative to projections, the political dimensions of its site selection and construction, and the long aftermath of community displacement that cost the government substantially in compensation settlements. The airport exists as a monument to the gap between political infrastructure planning and commercial aviation reality. Whether that gap was accidental or designed is the question that remains genuinely open.